Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Saturday, February 3rd, 2024. This is the Excerpt. Today, the latest from the Middle East, where the U.S. has responded to Sunday's attack that killed service members. Plus, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis has acknowledged her relationship with a special prosecutor, and how many black employees feel the need to code switch at work. U.S. warplanes unleashed 85 strikes yesterday against Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Force and militias in Iraq and Syria, linked to Sunday's attack in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. soldiers. According to U.S. Central Command, the strikes used 125 precision munitions. In a statement announcing the attacks, President Joe Biden said, quote, "The United States does not seek conflict in the Middle East or anywhere else in the world. But let all those who might seek to do us harm know this. If you harm an American, we will respond," unquote. Defense Department officials are in the early stages of assessing damage. John Kirby, White House spokesman for national security issues, said that officials believe the strikes were successful, though he said it's not clear how many, if any, militants have been killed or wounded in the strikes. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis yesterday acknowledged her romantic relationship with Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade, but she said she's not stepping down from the election fraud case against former President Donald Trump and 14 others because she said she's done nothing wrong. She has charged Trump, along with a host of other attorneys, campaign officials, and election workers, over their alleged efforts to overturn Joe Biden's 2020 victory in Georgia. Both she and Wade said the affair began after Willis hired Wade for the high-profile job of overseeing the racketeering investigation and prosecution of the former president and 2024 Republican frontrunner. Last month, a lawyer for former Trump campaign official Michael Roman asked the court to disqualify Willis, Wade, and the entire district attorney's office over the alleged relationship. Roman also accused Wade of using some of the more than $650,000 he's been paid to take Willis on a number of trips. Trump and Republicans in Congress have seized on the allegations to target Willis and her prosecution of the election case. Yesterday, House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan subpoenaed Willis, demanding documents related to how her office spends federal funds. Meanwhile, a federal judge has delayed Donald Trump's March 4th trial date on charges that he conspired to overturn the 2020 election. That's while awaiting an appeals decision on whether he is immune from the charges. You can follow along with all the latest on usatoday.com. Threats against election workers spiked after 2020, and there are concerns about finding and keeping staffers to collect and count ballots. I spoke with USA Today Justice Department correspondent Bart Jansen for more. Bart, thanks for hopping on.
Thanks for having me.
So Bart, let's start here. What portion of election workers has been threatened in recent years, especially since 2020? How big of an issue is this?
Well, what we're hearing from the people who deal with this day to day is that there was a huge spike in threats and harassment after the 2020 election, aside from questioning the credibility of whether the vote count is going well or who won the election, that a lot of the vitriol spilled onto the election workers, from secretaries of state all the way down to the ground level folks that just help you vote at the polls. And so the Justice Department set up a task force to investigate these threats and to help local officials deal with them. And that task force, set up in mid-2021, received more than 2,000 reports of different types of threats and harassment. So it's a significant problem, and there's some concerns that it hasn't let up. And so there's going to be quite a few threats between now and the election.
And could you just give us some examples, Bart, of the types of threats that we're talking about here?
Well, yeah, in the past, it would have been something like people getting upset about not knowing where a polling place was or the time of day to vote, that sort of thing. But in these recent years, it has escalated to the point of threats of violence, to death threats, bomb threats, to the point that in one state, a lawyer for a county who dealt with a lot of election issues started wearing bulletproof vests with his wife and children. And so the threats have become just quite a bit more serious, and they're taken seriously. And so that's why the investigations have ramped up both at the federal level, and then they are helping local officials also track down and charge when they can. Of course, the complication is that many of the reports are language that, even if it's heated or even if it sounds upset, can be protected by the First Amendment. And so the trick is for the prosecutors to find cases where they can actually pursue charges that deal with actual threats of violence, called true threats, and not just somebody that might be a little upset on a given afternoon.
Yeah, so you mentioned the task force that was created back in 2021 on the federal level. What else have we seen legislatively, especially at the state and local level, Bart, to try and combat this issue? And also, what's next on the legislative front to try and protect election workers?
Because of this spike of threats, a number of states have been adopting laws to protect their workers better. Just in the last year, we've seen laws in Colorado, Mississippi, Georgia, each taking steps to varying degrees of deterring threats and harassment, setting up penalties, fines, and the prospects for jail time, outlawing or prohibiting posting personal information of the people. One of the problems that's happened occasionally is that people who are upset with election workers post their personal information, cell phones, addresses, and so then the harassment winds up chasing the folks home. One of the people having his family threatened. And so with that personal information then has come some swatting incidents where somebody anonymously calls in that there is a police problem or a shooting or something like that at an election worker's house. The police arrive, and there's a great deal of confusion because nothing happened there, but yet the election worker suffers this sort of harassment. And so that sort of action is one of the things that several of these states have been targeting. So we've seen it's probably a dozen states adopting restrictions since the 2020 election, and the authorities are starting to take it more seriously.
All right, Bart Jansen covers the Justice Department for USA Today. Thank you, Bart.
Thanks for having me.
Hiring picked up sharply in January. Employers added 353,000 jobs in a labor market that continues to defy high interest rates and household financial strains. That far passes what economists surveyed by Bloomberg had estimated, which was around 185,000 jobs. The surprisingly strong month was driven by big payroll increases in healthcare and professional services, and it may have been helped by holiday hiring that may not last in the coming months. Still, it wasn't just January. Job gains for November and December were revised to add another 126,000 jobs. Meanwhile, the unemployment rate held steady at 3.7% last month, according to the Labor Department yesterday. You can read more with a link in today's show notes. Many Black Americans feel they can't be themselves at work, and they're more than 3 times more likely to code switch than white employees, according to a new poll. My colleague Sarah Ganem sat down with USA Today senior reporter Jessica Gwyn to learn more.
Jessica Gwyn, thanks so much for joining the Excerpt today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start big picture for folks who don't know. What does the term code switching mean?
For many Black and brown workers, code switching is as routine as breathing. They change their appearance, speech, and behavior to fit into their majority white workplaces and put their colleagues and bosses at ease. To some extent, code switching is a universal trait, meaning we all speak or act one way with friends and family and another with coworkers or our bosses. But Black and brown workers are far more likely to downplay their cultural identities at work to get hired, to get positive performance reviews, to get promoted, or just to get along. And our research at USA Today has shown that Black workers are sharply underrepresented in their workplaces, and they experience high rates of discrimination. So this behavior is just often described as a matter of survival, sort of like Black motorists being deferential during a police stop.
You wrote about a woman named Regina Lawless. What was her experience?
Well, as one of the few Black women in the corporate offices where she worked over the years, Regina basically adopted a uniform. Conservative blazers, low wedge heels. She tucked her hair in a wig instead of wearing natural hairstyles or braids, and she echoed the speech patterns of her white colleagues. She said she actively did all of this to avoid any negative stereotypes of Black women until she could establish a track record and form relationships so that people would not question her competence and her professionalism. Her last corporate job, she was hired to run DEI for Instagram after George Floyd was murdered. And that was the first time she started bringing her authentic self to work. And she said to me, if she couldn't be true to her identity as head of DEI, then really, who could?
And so how can organizations create an environment where people don't feel the need to change who they are?
This is really a tough cultural problem for organizations to fix, and it isn't an easy fix. But some of the questions organizations can start asking themselves, what are our unspoken norms of communication? And how are you treating employees who don't conform to those norms? Are you telling someone who speaks African American vernacular English that they are speaking unprofessionally? Is your dress code exclusionary? Does it penalize people who wear natural hairstyles? And the experts also told me that they encourage all of us to learn about cultural differences and to bring Black employees into our networks and invite their input.
Jessica Gwyn covers race and equity, among other things, and is a senior reporter for USA Today. Thanks so much for this reporting and for sharing it with me today.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for having me on.
2 separate cicada broods will emerge simultaneously in 17 states this year. The phenomenon has not occurred in more than 200 years. They're expected to emerge in mid-May and end in late June. And before I go, be sure to stay tuned to the Excerpt for tomorrow's episode when my colleague Dana Taylor speaks with Excerpt regular Elizabeth Weiss about efforts to resist green energy. You can find the episode right here on this feed. Thanks for listening to the Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for the Excerpt. You'll hear Dana tomorrow, and I'll be back Monday with more of the Excerpt from USA Today.